Hello everyone and welcome to React Part 1. I'm going to sort of start from scratch again, although I would recommend going through 9.1 over here. 9.1 covers some basics of React. 9.2 is very haphazard of a class, because I had to repeat too many things too many times. Also did not discuss much here, so feel free to skip this one. I'm going to recover everything that was covered here. This is a good, wouldn't call it a prerequisite, but might be a good, warm up before we get into today's video, which is going to cover all of these concepts. And in the end, we will try to build this Allen.in sort of a website. The reason I chose this website is because this is a single page application. We will understand what is a single page application, but that is where React actually shines. That is where you might want to use something like React. So let's understand the basics of React, what are single page applications, and then try to code this by the end. Will probably be a longer video, but of course it's broken down into chunks. So feel free to scroll to the right segment. Without any further ado, let's kick things off with how can you start a React project locally. All the things that we are going to learn today, we're going to learn via examples. So we need to have a React project running locally. There are various ways to start a React project. The most popular one today is by using this thing called Vite. Vite is owned by a person who recently raised $4.2 million. So they're onto something. And even if they did not raise any money, this is still, the most popular way to start a React project locally. What is Vite or why Vite? Or maybe let's just start with the original definition of Vite. What does it say? The build tool for the web. Vite is a blazingly fast front-end build tool powering the next generation of web applications. Harkirat, what is a build tool? Basically, when you write React code, that React code eventually gets converted into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. When you're testing React code locally, then also you need something to build your React code into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and give you a dev server, which has this thing called hot module replacement. These are the two high-level reasons you might want to use a bundler or you have to use a bundler. Let's read through it. Vite is a build tool that aims to provide a faster and leaner development experience for modern web projects. What is a modern web project? A project that is, let's say, written in React. It consists of two major parts. Number one, a dev server that provides rich feature enhancements over native ES modules. For example, extremely fast hot module replacement. Whenever you are testing your React project locally, if you make some change in your code base, that automatically appears on your front end. That is what hot module replacement is. If you can do all of this without Vite also. You can, if you've heard of Webpack, use Webpack, write a config to convert your React code into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and test it. But this is just the easiest way to do it for both development experience and for production experience. A build command that bundles your code with Rollup. I don't know how many of you have heard of Rollup. It is again something that competes with Webpack. If you don't know Webpack, then both of them let you convert some JavaScript code that you've written, let's say some TypeScript code that you've written, into a bundle. Now, what does a bundle mean? A single file which has all of your code. What does it say? The JavaScript module bundler compiles small pieces of code into something larger and more complex. So before Vite was a thing, सबसे पहले Create React app came into the picture. Then a lot of people would use Rollup, and eventually Vite came into the picture. And Vite is built on top of Rollup. It lets you run a dev server locally, run a production server locally. Vite is opinionated and comes with some sensible defaults out of the box. You can actually update the Vite config to change. Let's say how many JS files you have to create in your final JavaScript bundle, how big your JavaScript bundle should be. But it comes with some sensible defaults. Rarely do you touch them unless you have a very big application where you want to do something very specific. Okay? That is what is Vite. And Vite is what we will be using to start our React project locally. What used to happen before Vite, you might have heard of Create React app. That is one way to start React projects locally as well. Although I would stick to Vite, and most projects that you will see would also use Vite for starting a React project locally, bundling the React project. How can you start a React project locally? Run the command. Let me go to the right folder here. So let me go to a fresh folder in projects in cohort 3, and then run the command npm create vite at the rate of latest. It will ask me for the name of the project. I'm going to name it week 9 offline. I'm going to select React as the framework. I'm going to select JavaScript as the language. Then I'm going to go to week 9 offline and open this in Visual Studio Code. From there, our actual coding will begin. Let's also play with the program a little before we start to code and learn some new technologies. I have opened the project in Visual Studio Code. Feel free to take a pause and have the same project open on your side. Explore the project a bit. It has a eslint.config.js. We'll come to what this is eventually and understand eslint and prettier. It has an index.html. This probably is, our HTML file. It looks a little weird though. It has some div ID equal to root here. It has a script type equal to module, source equal to /source/main.jsx. That is probably this file right here, /source/main.jsx. And nothing else it has right now. There is a package.json, which if you look at the dependencies, it has React and React DOM as two of the dependencies. Right now we are creating a website using React. Hence we have used React DOM as a dependency. If you were writing React native code, then we would not have React DOM as a dependency. We would have React native as a dependency. React remains constant, whether you are trying to build a mobile application or a web application. If you are creating a web application, you use something called React DOM. It is what is called the renderer for a website. And if you want to create a mobile app using React Native, then you use React Native. It is the renderer for your web, for a mobile application, but both of them use React as the framework for doing diffing. What is diffing? We discussed a little bit in 9.1, but basically the goal of React is to make sure it finds the difference between an old state and a new state and updates the UI. That is what React does. Now, if the UI is a website, you use React DOM. If the UI is a mobile app, you use React Native. Today, we are creating a website. Hence, we will use React DOM. Let's go to what was the entry file, index.html. What did it use? It used source/main.jsx. Let's go to source/main.jsx. And here we see a create root function is imported from React DOM/client. From where is it imported? React DOM. This dependency right here. And we say, okay, I'm going to call create root on this element of my website, document.getElement by ID root, this specific DOM element, and I'm going to render. Ignore strict mode for now. Let me remove strict mode to make our lives a little bit easier. I'm going to render the app component in this specific div. What do I say? Okay, React, you have full control of this specific div. You have full control of this specific div. इसके अंदर जो भी जाएगा, whatever goes inside this is controlled by the React code that you are going to write, or more specifically by this app component. जो भी इस app component में है, whatever is in this app component is going to get rendered over here. Let's look at the app component कि इसमें है क्या exactly. Where did we start? Index.html. Where did we reach? Main.jsx. Where are we going? App.jsx, because that is where this app component is exported from. If you look at this file, it defines a function which is very complicated right now. Let's make it a little simpler. Let's simply return something like this from here. Hi there. What are we doing? We have created a function which returns some HTML, surprisingly. This is the first time you might be seeing this. Until now, we have seen functions that have returned, let's say a number or a string. But what is it returning right now? It is returning some HTML. And then we export this function over here. Notice what happens in our final website. Let me get rid of all the extra imports. Let me get rid of app.css import here as well. In fact, let me completely clean app.css and index.css. Let's have a fresh starting point for our website. In app.jsx now, I have a component. What is a component? We will get to very soon. Hopefully little you remember from 9.1 video. This component returns hi there inside a div. We export it and it is imported in main.jsx, where we have said, okay, create root on this specific div, render the app component. Let's see what we see on our website. If I now start my React project in dev mode, what was Vite? Vite would let you do two things. What would Vite let you do? Start a dev server and then finally build your application for production. Right now, we are starting a dev server. Let's run npm run dev. Before that, run npm install to install all the dependencies on your machine. And then run npm run dev to start the Vite server. Vite gives you a developmental server. We start it over here. And when I do that, it tells me the application is hosted on localhost 5173. If I now go to this specific website, you will notice hi there appears at the top of the website. And if I go to app.jsx, hi there is what I had returned from here. Notice though, if I add or change this to hi there too and save it, the change automatically appears over here. What is this? Hot module replacement. This specific change happened automatically. I did not have to stop my process and restart my process. So that is one of many things a bundler would give you. In this case, Vite is giving you so that your developmental experience is much better. Great. Let's explore this website. इसका HTML कैसा दिखता है? What does the HTML look like? If I go to the elements tab here, what does it say? It has an HTML tag at the top. Did the index.html that I had here, did it also have doc type HTML? It did. This guy also has that. Did it have an HTML tag? It did. This guy also have that. A head tag, this guy has it. A body tag, this guy has it. What does that tell you? Okay, the code that you see over here is effectively what came over here. Only जो div id equal to root है, div id equal to root, this div is controlled by React. This div is controlled by React. Hi there is put on the screen by React. I can put something above it, above the root, and I can put something below it, below the root. If I refresh, can you see above the root and below the root? So you can write your normal HTML code here. You can write your normal HTML code here. But this specific div we gave to React. Okay, React, you are going to control this div. You are going to put components over here. Where did we do that? We did that in main.jsx. यहाँ पे we said create root, this document.getElement by id root, this specific div के अंदर we will render the app component. This is the component that we will render inside this top level root. This guy right here. This is where you write most of your website. Eventually, when we will be writing our website, we will not really worry about main.jsx, index.html. We will only worry about app.jsx. And here is where we will be writing all of our components. This is how you start a basic React application locally. If I go back to index.html, let me remove the above from root and below from root. So we have a normal React application functioning. From here, let's get into learning some React concepts that let you make a dynamic website. Until now, though, I mean, you might think, okay, Harkirat, I will to write all of my code over here. And you can write all of your HTML code over here. But the goal is that you create a application that can be used by multiple developers. That will only be done if you are structuring your app into components so that you are defining a state of your application. So A dumb developer might say, okay, I'm going to write all of my HTML here. But since you are a smart developer, you are going to learn React the right way. You are going to structure your application into components after you understand what are components and define a state of your application. We'll do both of that as we understand some of these concepts. Let's dive into the first sort of concept or second concept for today, components. Hopefully you already understand what this is. Let's get into components. All right, what is a component? In React, components are the building blocks of the user interface. They allow you to split the UI into independent reusable pieces that can be thought of as a custom self-contained HTML element. In React, components are the building blocks of the user interface. If you are making this complex LinkedIn-like interface, the building block of it might be a navbar component where you've written the code for this, the HTML for just this. A create post component where you have written the HTML for this. And a post component where the post of a user gets rendered. For example, here is a post by 100x devs. Here is another post below it. Notice both of them point to the same component, the post component. So what is a component? Components are the building blocks of the user interface and they allow you to split the UI into independent reusable pieces. This post component is something you can reuse again and again by changing the inputs to it. यहाँ पे the title input might be 100x devs. Here the title input might be LinkedIn for marketing. Here the image might be this 100x devs image. Here the image is this LinkedIn image. Here the body is this. Here the body is this. So all of these posts that you see on LinkedIn are the same component. The inputs to the components are different. How can you pass inputs to a component is something we will get to. But do we understand components? Let's try to code it. Let's try to code a component and see if we understand them. This seems like a decentish component to build. Let's try to see, can we create this reusable HTML component? What is a component? They allow you to split the UI into independent reusable pieces that can be thought of as self-contained HTML. Let's write the self-contained HTML for this. Let's write the component for this post component. Let me open Visual Studio Code. This is our current application. Here, I'm going to define the next component for today. We already have an app component that pretty much does nothing right now, simply renders hi there too on the screen. I am going to define another component called post component where I am going to write the self-contained HTML for something like this. Now, what does the HTML for something like this look like? Here seems like its width is 400 pixels. So let me add some CSS over here. I am pre-introducing how to add CSS in React. We will also cover it later. But if you want to restrict the width of a div, you can do it like this in HTML. In React. Div style equal to curly braces inside which you give an object. So I can define the object here, const style equal to something like this, and give the style object here. Or if I want, I can copy this style object and directly paste it over here. This feels a little complicated. Why are there two opening braces and two closing braces? But in the end, what you have is an object that is passed in inside curly braces. This is how you pass in a style to a React component. Or, specifically in this case, this is how you give styles to, let's say, a div element. What is the background color of our div element? It is white in color. So let me give it a background color white. Notice I cannot write background dash color over here. If I want to, I will have to write it like this. In JavaScript objects, you can't have a dash in the middle. So either write it like this, or whenever there is a dash, just capitalize the letter. That is the same thing. That would let you put in style attributes that have a dash in the middle. Background color. What else do we have here? There's probably some border radius, some border color. So quickly, let's try to style it. Border radius, let's say 10. Border color, let's say gray. And border width, let's say 1 pixel. Something like this. This seems like we have created a good enough HTML and CSS for a component like this. What are we doing? Defining the post component. Given it the style, inside which, what do we have to write? सबसे पहले तो there is an image over here. Then there is a title, number of followers and time. So let me put an image tag first. img src equal to. Again, here, even if you're passing in a string, you can put it inside curly braces. Whenever you are giving an attribute in React, you should give it inside curly braces. If it is a string, then it isn't necessarily needed. It won't complain अगर मैं यहाँ पे double brace नहीं डालता हूँ. But if you want, you can still wrap this inside a curly brace. Next up, I need to find the logo for this specific, org URL here. And of course, I have to give it some style, right? Again, the way to give it style is either I can define it outside over here, or I can put the style directly over here. Style, let's say width 20, height 20, and border radius 200. So it's sort of circular in nature. 20 should be good enough. Let's see how this looks like. This post component that I have written this component. I have not yet rendered it. As you can see, it is slightly lighter yellow in color. It is telling you post component is declared, but it is never read. It is never used. So what I'm going to do is, rather than having hi there here, I'm going to render the post component. A component can render another component. Creating a component is similar to you creating a structure, a reusable HTML for your final website. Now, if I open the website, you see the image over here, 20 cross 20, 20 is the radius. Are we getting close to what we want to build? We wanted to build this profile card. Which one were we building? One of these two. Let's say we're building this one. This one was the one we were building, right? The post component. So this I have built. What else do I need? 100x devs, followers, time, and then a world image. So let's write the HTML for that. Do you guys remember how can you place two things right next to each other in a div? You have to add display flex to the parent. If I add display flex to this parent, then all its children will be right next to each other. So here, if I write 100x devs, maybe inside a bold tag, and then let's say I write, right below 100x devs, I need, let's say 23,777 followers. And then right below that, let's say I write, we put these inside a span or a div. Let's just put them inside a div. Right below, we will write, 12 minutes. This way, I've been able to create some part of the post component. I haven't created the whole thing right now. I have created this, upper version right here. Maybe one more thing I can add is the actual body of the post or the actual contents of the post. So let me add another div afterwards where I will write, want to know how to win big. Check out how these folks won $6,000 in bounties. Something like this. Now I have created a mildly complicated post component. It has a bunch of things. Let's see what it looks like. It looks something like this. Of course, it looks very ugly because this parent I put flex in. So this also came right next to it. So let me move this below. Let me create another parent div here. Something like this. I have a parent div whose first child has display set to flex. So everything in the first child this child right here will be right next to each other, this guy and this guy. And then I have another div below where I'm writing this content. So this is div 1, this is div 2, this is div 1, and this is div 2. Let me give it some style. Font size, let's say, is 12. And even over here, let me give this whole div a style of font size 10. Again, notice this might feel very complicated, 2 curly braces over here, but it is nothing but one curly brace inside which I am putting an object, which I can define separately also, or I can directly put over here. Now, if I look at it, the final outcome looks something like this. Decentish. I want to probably make profile picture a little bigger. Let's do that. I want to put some margin between both of these. Let me do that. Margin left 20. It's too much, 10. And then here, this is below it. We have sort of created our first post component, which is similar to this post component right here. Our post isn't really long, which is why, it just appears like this. Our background of the whole body isn't gray. Let me do that. Let me make the background of this whole parent div background color gray, so that gray is the bad color, lighter gray we need. So let me go to flat UI colors and find a very nice light gray color, something like this. And let me make that the background. Let me also make its height equal to 100 VH, which makes take the whole height of the thing. And somewhere div has a margin, which is why there's a margin here and here. We can fix that. And one more thing we need to do is the parent div needs to have this style, and the first child div will have display flex. Display flex I have applied to the first child. Who is the first child? This guy right here. This guy needs to have display flex, but the parent needs to have background color of white. So the background color white I've applied to the main parent. The first child I've set display flex, so items appear right next to each other. The second child is a normal div over here. Let's see what it looks like if I go to the website. This is what it sort of looks like. Oh, I messed things up. I need to remove display flex here. Alrighty, there you go. Now you can, do all the math, make it centrally aligned if you want. Display flex, justify content center. So it appears in the center of the screen, and it's taking up the full width, the child. So what we can do is, if we want, there are a few ways to fix this. I'm trying to find the leanest one. One second, let me quickly figure out how can we make this centrally aligned without taking the full width. Let me first actually give it some margin here or some padding here. All right, there we go. And let's figure out how can we centrally align this. There are various ways. Yeah, let's do this. Div style equal to display flex justify content center. So this is my main component. Yahan pe I have written my main logic to render the component, render a lot of HTML. What am I rendering? All of this in a single post component. Why is this good? Because if I want another post right below it, I can do this. If I want another post right below it, I can do this. If I really want it below it, then I can wrap it inside a div. Then it will be one below the other. That won't be it, but that should be fixable by doing something like this. I know I'm complicating this a bit, but the reason I had to complicate this a bit was because this specific div has display flex. So all of its children will appear right next to each other. So I just made a single div over here so that this guy is the first, takes the first section over here. This guy goes right below it. This div doesn't have display flex. Inka jo parent hai, let me show you. The parent of all three of these, the parent of all three of these is an empty div. doesn't have display flex. So all three of these will appear one after the other. But iska parent has display flex only because we had to centrally align it. And I chose this way to centrally align my divs. I can also put a normal BR tag here, a break tag, to add some space between elements. And that is what a component is. This is our first post component that we have created. And here we are using the post component to create the app component. The app component uses the post component. The post component simply uses normal HTML tags, div, image, etc. If we wanted, the post component could also use other components. So you can have, a very nice nested tree of components based on what you are building. For us, we were building what? We were building something like this section right here, posts like these. So for us, we created a single post component that looks something like this. And what is the best part of this? It is highly reusable. I can reuse it over here again and again. And you will see the output here again and again, one card below the other. That is what a component is. You might ask, Karkirat, how can I change the images? You are saying it is reusable, but it is not reusable. How can I add someone else's photo here, someone else's body here, someone else's, whatever, follower count here? We will see that very soon when we reach props. When we reach what? When we reach props, we will understand how can you change the data inside all of these cards. How can you make this card actually reusable? Right now, it isn't really reusable. It has the same contents. Iska jo content hai, iska content hai, iska content hai. On LinkedIn, I said both of these are the post component, but as you can see, their body is different. Yahan pe title says LinkedIn for marketing. Here title says 100x devs. How can we do the same thing in our post component that we have created over here? Is something we will learn once we reach props. That is what a component is. If I go back to the slides, in React, components are the building blocks of the user interface. They allow you to split the UI into independent, reusable pieces that can be thought of as custom self-contained HTML elements. I have created one such custom self-contained HTML element. Cool. We have created the first one. Can you, before you proceed, maybe try creating a trending now component or a profile component? How difficult do you think it will be? Take it as an assignment. Try to code another component here called profile card and try to write the right HTML for it inside, so that something like this you can create independently. Can you see how beneficial this is? Different developers, different design UI engineers can work separately on components. Eventually they can all be glued together via state. That is what we will discuss next, state. But before that, hopefully this is clear. We are done with components. Next up, we are going to understand state. What is state? Why do you need state? Why did I say, designing these components is one part, but maintaining the state of your application is another part. So that is in the third slide here. Maybe before that, I want to introduce props, because if you understand props, understanding state will be much easier. So let's first understand props. Let's go directly to slide number 6. Then we will come back to these slightly complicated hooks over here. Let's go and understand props in the next section. All right. As mentioned in the last section, the problem is, the components that LinkedIn has sometimes have conditional rendering. Here, 12 minutes ago is rendered. There are 3 titles over here. Here, there are only 2 titles. One is promoted, one is LinkedIn for marketing. So how can we add conditional rendering to our component? Let's look at our component again, the post component that we had written. Image we need always. Title we need always. Subtitle we need always. But this third time argument, or more technically, if you look at it, this time had an image right next to it. So let me make this technically right. Let me add a div display flex. And let me add an image tag over here. World image. Copy image address. Either one. I better put an icon here, or clock. image, something like this. Copy image address, src equal to this thing, and some style over here like width 10, height probably 5, I would say 5, something like this. I have made the third div slightly more complicated. I have the time on the left and a clock on the right. So if you look at it, same thing happens here. Time on the left, clock on the right. In fact, there is a dot in the middle as well that you can add. If you look at it, the clock is really small right now. So let me make it a little bit bigger. There you go. Sort of a clock we have here. Not the prettiest clock right now. You can always, make this prettier, use some icon library to make this slightly prettier. But the problem is now we don't want the third subtitle in a few places. In fact, the subtitle itself यहाँ पे says something followers, but यहाँ पे only says promoted. So we will have to change our code a lot to first make sure subtitle comes from the parent. But अभी क्या होगा? Let's say we just restrict ourselves to 2 posts. We get rid of the third post. We have post number 1 and post number 2. This is what my post number 1 and post number 2 look like. I want here to say promoted. So what will I do? I will be like, yeah, let me change the second argument to, let's say, promoted. But the problem is it says promoted followers. So what do I have to do? I have to make this component more generic. What does more generic mean? कि यार you can't assume कि यहाँ पे followers आएंगे. You can't assume that followers would be present as a string over here. If someone wants followers as a string, they will need to pass it in the prop. So follower count, whoever is passing in will need to pass 20 followers, and the one below it passed promoted. Now, does it make sense for this prop to be called follower count? This is not follower count. This is follower count. So can we replace this prop to be something like subtitle? Subtitle. And even when we are destructuring it in the post component, I'm going to replace this with subtitle. That way, it is just a more better representation of what this prop does. It is the subtitle over here. 20 followers over here, promoted over here, great. Problem is, we don't want the third subtitle here. We want the third subtitle here. We want to conditionally render the third thing. So what can I do? Harkirat, आप भेजो ही मत. Don't send the time from the second component. Send it from the first component. That way 2 minutes ago will get rendered here. Don't send it from the second component. This is almost fine, but what is the problem? Empty clock appears over here. We need to not render the empty clock if there is no time passed in. If time is not passed in, then we don't want even the clock to appear. We only want Raman and promoted to appear. This is where conditional rendering comes into the picture. If I scroll down, I can say here कि यार ये जो पूरा div है, this complete div which has first the time rendered, this thing right here, then the icon rendered, this thing right here, this complete div needs to be conditionally rendered. How can you render this complete div conditionally? You can put it inside curly braces and then put the condition in front. KR only if, what is the name of the prop? Time. Only if time is passed in, only if time is, let's say, not equal to undefined, or the condition can also be just this much. If time is not equal to undefined, only then render the whole thing. Otherwise, don't render the parent div also, don't render the first div also, don't render the image tag also. So as you can see, only this and this are rendered. But if I look at it, when time is passed in, then everything is rendered. So do we understand how do you conditionally render elements? यहाँ पे I don't want the third div to be rendered. So what did I do? I put this div inside some curly braces. This whole div I put inside curly braces, and I put a condition in front. If time is not equal to undefined, if time is passed in as a string, then render the whole thing. That is what this and does. Okay, if this is true, then render this. Or you can use the ternary operator over here. Ternary operator, if you don't know, you should Google. Ternary operator lets you do something similar to if else. It says, okay, this is the condition. If this condition is true, then render this div. Else render, let's say null, or you can put an empty div over here if you want. Really depends on you. You can put an empty div over here or put null over here. That is how we conditionally render either this div or null based on if this condition is true. If it is true, question mark means then render this, else render null. So that will do the same thing. And now we have the first one which has 3 things, the second one which has 2 things. Do we understand conditional rendering in React? To recap, what does conditional rendering let you do? It lets you define a condition. Okay, for example, this is some great code to look at, but you need to understand use state first. But if this code is great for you to, show such a message on screen as you press a button. Let's look at this code, even though, it uses something called use state, which we will discuss next. But let's just understand this later. Let's not take this code as a benchmark. Let's understand use state next. Then we will come back to this code, even though you can try to sort of understand this. This is a variable. And whenever I click on the button, the variable is sort of flipped. And based on this variable, we are conditionally rendering this message. This message is conditionally rendered. As I click on the button, the message contents will change. Let me show you the thing. Let me copy the component here, paste it in our component. Toggle message is a component over here. Let me render it at the top. If I now go here, one more thing I have to do is import use state from React. Now toggle message, this message is conditionally rendered. Toggle message, this message doesn't show up. So this button lets me conditionally render something. How does it happen? We will discuss in the next section when we understand about toggle message. So for the next section, I'm going to get rid of everything over here and we will just focus on this very small component called toggle message. All right. If you've gone through our video 9.1, you might have seen me talk about state and components and the fact that every website that you see can actually be broken down into these 2 things. Components we have already talked about. Now we're going to talk about state. State usually is the dynamic part of any web page. For example, here 99 plus as a notification is dynamic. Why is it dynamic? Because this number keeps changing even if I don't leave the website. Even if I stay on the website for some time, this number, for example, can go up to 26, 27. The messages that you see over here can, the contents of those messages can change. As I scroll down, more and more posts can get added. So the image of this post, title of this post, head of ops, all of these things, the dynamic bits are what are called state, and the actual HTML, for example, this home component, my network component, is what is called a component. The app that we have built until now actually has some variation of state and components. We haven't just seen it as state. So let's try to first understand with a simpler example what is state. Then we will see how can our post application also have state that lets you control the posts on the screen. Just like LinkedIn has more posts as you scroll down, what is really happening is that LinkedIn's state is changing. Component तो same ही है, it is still the same component. But more and more components are getting added because the state is changing. So let's understand it with these two examples. First, with the simpler example over here. So I'm going to go back to the code and remove or comment the very big post component that we have and just focus on the greeting, not even the greeting, the toggle message component. So let me comment this also. And let me remove all of this from here and move it to the bottom of the screen. We will come back to it eventually whenever we understand the more complicated set of state. For now, this is what my code looks like. Very simple, nothing too complicated. I have a global app component inside which I have a div whose height is the complete height of the width of the window. That is what VH over here means. And this is the background color, inside which I render the toggle message component. This is a slightly special component. Here, I am not simply returning a div. Before I do that, I have something else written over here. What is this exactly? And how do we use it in dynamic applications is the goal of this section. This line of code is what is called state definition. What I'm trying to do is define a new state variable. What am I doing in this line? Defining a new state variable. What is a state variable? It is a variable whose value when changes, I repeat, when the value of a state variable changes, the component that uses the state variable re-renders. I repeat, when the value of a state variable changes, the component that uses the state variable re-renders. What is re-rendering? We will discuss very soon. But ये जो variable है, it is slightly different from this variable. Const is visible equal to true. I can define variables like this in JavaScript, but this isn't a state variable. This is a state variable, and there is a very important difference between this guy and this guy. Firstly, let's get rid of the state variable. Complicate karna hi nahi. Keeping things very simple. I define a variable called is visible, and I say, I have defined a div inside which there is a button. When you click on the button, this might seem complicated, so let me write something like this. Button on click equal to toggle. Whenever the button is clicked, call the toggle function that is defined over here. And then conditional rendering that says, if it is visible, then render this message is conditionally rendered. If is visible is false, then don't render this. That is what this line of code over here does. What do you think I should write in the toggle function? Can you guess? Firstly, Harkirat, make this let. Okay, I've made this let. Secondly, Harkirat, just make is visible equal to opposite of is visible. If is visible was true, make it false. If is visible was false, make it true. That is what not of is visible would do. If it was false, it will convert it to true. If it was true, it will convert it to false. That is what this line of code here does. Do you think this is enough to create what we intend to create? I hope you understand what we intend to create. We want, whenever the user clicks on this button, this message keeps on toggling on the screen. So if I go to the website, I see the toggle message button. As I click on it, this message does not get toggled, surprisingly. I click on this message does not get toggled. Is there an error in my logs? In my logic. What is my logic? My logic says, yaar, button pe click karo, on click equal to call the toggle function where we change the value of this is visible variable. Why is this message not toggling between on, off, visible, non-visible, visible, non-visible? The answer is the component isn't re-rendering because we haven't used a state variable. In React, React will handle all DOM updates for you. React will be like, ठीक है भाई, you write very simple logic. I will write the logic to remove elements from here and add elements. But whenever you are doing conditional logic like this, whenever you are using a dynamic variable, make sure it is a state variable. ये simple variables नहीं चलेंगे. I am not tracking every single variable that you are defining. I am only tracking the state variables is what React says. So React says, okay, don't write simple variables that you are going to use in this part of the code. Whenever you are using a variable in this part of the code, make it a state variable. Rather than writing let is visible equal to true, write let is visible, comma, set is visible equal to use state true. React says here the variable that you are defining, define it as a state variable. What is a state variable? A variable जो जब change होता है, whenever this variable changes, React re-renders this component. React rechecks, okay, has this variable changed? Acha, it has. So let me conditionally re-render this element right here. This change will only propagate if it is defined as a state variable. This is how you define a state variable in React. And this is how you update a state variable. You can try updating a state variable like this, but it will not work. You should not ever change state variables like this. You should always change state variables, update their value by calling the second element over here. useState is a function which when you call with an initial state, useState is a function, you call it with an initial state, it returns you an array. This thing returns you an array which has two elements. First element might be something, second element is a function. Something like this it returns. Here we are destructuring that array. We are taking this true value, putting it over here, taking this function, putting it over here. That way, this and this become two variables. This being the actual state variable that you will use here. This being how can you update the state variable. Now, if I refresh this page and toggle, notice the message actually toggles. Why is that? Because this component re-renders. This component that we have over here is re-rendering. What does re-rendering mean, Harkirat? It means that this function is getting called by React. Let me write something here. Let me write a console.log here called re-render. And let me inspect the code. Few re-renders have happened. And if I click on this, notice another re-render came. I clicked on this, another re-render came. Clicked on it, another re-render came. So what is happening over here? This function is getting called again and again. When it is called again, it is called with the updated value of is visible, which is why the right HTML is, rendered or not rendered here on the screen. Lot of jargon, extremely complicated. Nahi samajh aaya? No problem. Let's do an experiment with me. Install this specific extension that I have over here. This is called the React Dev Tools extension. A link to it is present over here in the next slide itself, tracking re-renders. Install the React Dev Tools to track which components are re-rendering as your state changes. This will give you a good intuition of how React does re-rendering. So this is a link to it. Try to install it. Once you add this to Google Chrome, this specific extension, you will see the extension over here. Right click, click on inspect, go to the components tab over here. You will see these two tabs now. If your React extension is active, click on settings and click on highlight updates when component re-renders. What does it say? Highlight updates when component renders. If I click on this message, can you see a blue box around? Let me click on it again. Can you see the blue box again? Blue box, blue box. This blue box is telling you कि this component re-rendered. This component में React realized कि a change has happened, a state change has happened, and React re-rendered the whole thing. React recalculated कि based on the current state, this should be rendered. Based on the current state, that should not be rendered. Based on the current state, this should be rendered. This is what is called re-rendering. Let's take a more complex example. Let me render toggle message thrice. So we have 1, 2, 3. 3 components. This is component number 1. This is component number 2. This is component number 3. When I click on toggle message on the first one, do you think all 3 components re-render or just the first component re-renders? Where am I changing the state? I am changing the state in the first component only. क्या ये जो code है इसके अंदर there is a state variable defined. Then there is this code जिसके अंदर its own is visible state variable is defined. इसके अंदर the third is visible state variable is defined. So when I click on this, the first component only re-renders. Click on it again. Only the first gets a blue box. If I click on the third one re-renders. The third one re-renders. If I click on the second one re-renders. Click on it again, second one re-renders. So what have I done over here? I have created 3 components. Each one of these has its own is visible state variable defined. And whenever I click on toggle message, that specific component's state variable changes. इसका is visible variable change हुआ है, इसका नहीं हुआ है, इसका नहीं हुआ है. This has its own HTML and this has its own state variable. This has its own toggle function. So each one of these are different. Each one of these have their own state variable. And if I click on the first one, re-renders, 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 only the first component re-renders. Try this out on your side as well. What does this tell you? This tells you that React is a framework for creating dynamic websites only if you are using the state variables that React provides you via this use state hook. I repeat, React is a dynamic website framework. Our website is very dynamic. If I click on it, button goes away. Click on it, button comes back. Let's try to create this notification bar. Okay, there is a button, there is an icon, and some number over here that keeps on changing. Let me change the toggle message component to have a state variable called notification count. Set notification count, which I initialize to 0. And rather than defining a toggle function, I am going to define a function called increment, where I will set notification count to be the current notification count plus 1. This is what do I want it to update to. जो original value थी plus 1 is the new value of notification count. And over here, let me render the notification count. Notice as I click on this, this count keeps on going up. That is sort of what happens in LinkedIn, right? If someone sends me a message, this count goes up. It happens silently. Here you have to click on a button to trigger that change. But we have a dynamic website very similar to LinkedIn, where did I write any code that looks like document.get element by ID dot append child, all the extremely complicated DOM manipulation that we had done until now. Did I as the developer have to do it anymore? No. Let me replace this message with increase count. Click on it, goes up, click on it, goes up, click on it, goes up. This notification count variable is a state variable. It is contained inside this component. This notification count state variable is contained inside this component. If I render toggle message 3 times, This has its own notification count variable. This has its own notification count variable. I can increment them independently. This is what a state variable is. Can you now, given our original LinkedIn post that we had, our LinkedIn post, over there, can we try to use state variables to render multiple posts? Let's try it out. Let's try to revert our original code. Firstly, this is what the code looks like right now. I'm rendering toggle message thrice. This is what the toggle message component looks like, and I have changed it a bit than the original implementation. Define a state variable here, initialize to 0, and then define a function where I set notification count, change the notification count to notification count plus 1. I cannot do this, notification count equal to notification count plus 1. This will not work. If I increase count now, notice, even though this variable is going up by 1, React is not re-rendering your changes. React is not listening to कि अच्छा ये बढ़ गया है. React only knows कि you have updated this state variable if you call this function right here. You have to call this function with the updated value, and only then React knows कि हाँ, the value is going up, or this component needs to re-render. Let's look at the other example. Let's try to create our posts one by one and go from there. But for some of you who might need this code, I'm going to copy this code and paste it in slides. So if you go back to our original slides, you will find this code as well. Let me put it in the use state section. So I've put the code here as well. I'm going to call it counter notification count code. And if you want, you can look at this code from the slides, try it out on your side. App component renders 3 toggle messages, which look very similar to the code we had written. Only thing is, we define notification count as a state variable. We don't define it separately as a normal variable. We don't do this. We don't do this. We do something like this. Cool. Alrighty. Let's try to look at this code, try to understand this code, and then try to, given this starting point, let me again remove what we had written. All right, here is the assignment. I have structured the project a little better for the assignment. We have our app.jsx file and a separate post.jsx file. This post.jsx file you can also find here in the slides. So if you go to the slides, specifically to the third section right here, use state, in the end, you will find the post component that you can copy over to a separate file called post.jsx. Notice I am exporting this component from here. I am writing export function post component. So even though it is defined in this file, I can, you guessed it, import the post component in our original app.jsx file. We are slowly structuring our application a little bit better, so it's easier to read through the code. This is what it looks like right now. Look at this boilerplate code. I have a div inside which I have a button that says add post. Then I have another div which will send one right now, which again comes from ./post, this specific file right here. If I open this on the left and open the final render on the right, this is what it looks like. Now comes the question, how can I, when I click on add post, add more cards to the screen, very similar to when I'm on LinkedIn and I scroll, more and more posts get added below. Let's see how we can do that. Step 1, you might already be able to guess, okay, if we want to do this, we want to maintain an array. I cannot simply, keep appending another component over here and then another component. I want to create a array, let's say called posts, where I will be storing all of my posts. Initially, this array will be empty. And slowly as time goes by, this array will get more and more values, and those are what will reflect over here in more and more cards. So I can define the first post over here. Let's say the title of the post is, or whatever name of the post is, Harkirat. The subtitle is 10,000 followers. The time is 2 minutes ago. Image is this image URL. And lastly, description is this very long description. Based on this post, I want to render the post component. If there are 20 posts, I want to render 20 post components. If there are 3 posts, I want to render 3 post components. So what do I want to do? I want to somehow introduce a for loop over here that iterates over these posts and renders them one by one. This is a new concept. We haven't discussed this until now. How can, given a posts array, how can we iterate over it and render, let's say, 10 posts, 20 posts on the screen? Here is a hint of how you can do that. Let me put this render firstly inside curly braces, and then let me convert this into an array. Notice if I have an array of a post component, it still appears normally over here. And if I add a second element over here, which is also almost the same, a post component, that is the second element of this array, I see 2 posts over here. What have I done? I have not simply rendered one component after another component. I have not done this. I can do this also. This does the same thing. But notice if I put them in an array like this, and then add them inside curly braces, the same thing happens. 2 posts get rendered over here. So can you now guess how can I convert this posts array of objects into a posts array of components? Given this array has one object right now, how can I convert this into an array of post component? By using array.map, right? Const post components equal to posts.map. Given a post, I want such a post component to be in the final array. The final array should look something like, if this is the original array, then the final array should look something like this: post component with all the props. If the original array had 2 elements, I want the final array that will eventually come over here to have 2 post components. If this original array had 3 objects in here, then I want the final array over here to have 3 post components inside the array. So can I not, given the original posts array, do a posts.map, and given every individual post, replace the name by post.name, subtitle by post.subtitle, title by post.title, image by post.image, description by post.description. Given this original array of raw JavaScript objects, post components has an array of these components. And can I then not replace this array of 2 post components with what I have created over here? What did I do again? Okay, I want eventually, when I click on the add posts button, I want to add another object over here. So what if I define this object as a variable? What if whenever the user clicks on this object, I add another element to this variable? Then I take this array of objects, convert it into an array of components, and those components is what I render over here. That is how you iterate, or you do lists sort of We will understand lists later also. There is a section over here called lists and keys, but I am just introducing it to you a little bit earlier because they are being used in this assignment. What do I want to do? I want to render a list, but the original value of that list is an array of objects. I want to convert it into an array of components or a list of components. This is how you would render an array of objects on the screen by converting them into a bunch of components. But what do I want on add posts button? Whenever this button is clicked, what do I want? Can you guess? I want to push to the posts array another post. Let's say I keep everything the same. I want to push to the posts array something similar so that another post comes below it. Given a variable, I am using that variable to create something which I render over here. And whenever the user clicks on this button, I am pushing to the post's original variable. Question is, why is it not working? Why do when I click on this button, what happens? Button on click equal to add post, which means control reaches here. Then I push to the posts array. Why is my component not re-rendering? Because I have not defined posts as a state variable. I have not done const posts comma set posts equal to use state empty array initially. Okay, initially my posts are empty. I have no posts on the screen. So posts component would again be an empty array. That is what renders over here. Now, if I click on add posts, what would happen? We are pushing to the posts array, but what have we learned until now? Okay, until you call set posts, your components don't re-render. Your app component will not re-render. React will not understand. Okay, posts has changed. I need to recalculate the posts component here, which is why rather than pushing to posts like this, what we have to do is call set posts with a new array. I repeat, set posts with a new array which has the original array plus this thing added to the end of it. What do we want to do? We want to say set posts with the original array, which is this guy right here, posts, and the new value that I want to add to it. Is this code right? Am I missing something here, or is this code right? I am saying कि यार set post इसको update कर दो with a new array जिसकी पहली element is another array. What I've written is wrong. I need to spread the original array and then add the new element right after it. I've done a bunch of things here. Let me make it slightly easier to understand in the console. Let's say I have an original array, let x equal to 1, 2, 3. And I want to create a new array which has 1, 2, and 3 and a new value at the end 4. So what can I do? I can either do x.push, but we saw we cannot do that. You can't do posts.push. The change will not update. We have to call set posts with a new array, and this new array needs to have everything from the original posts, everything from the original x variable, that is 1, 2, 3, and it needs to have the new value which is 4. So when I create an array that looks like this, dot 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 x means every element from here, comma 4, what comes on screen? 1, 2, 3, and 4. A new array is created with all the elements from the original array, comma 4. So this spread operator is used whenever you have an original array and you want to spread that original array and then add more elements after. Or if I want to add a value before and then dot 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 x, what will that do? It will take 0 as the first element and spread the rest of the array over here. That is exactly what we want. We want to set posts to a new array where all the original posts are present, dot 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 posts, and a new post is pushed towards the end. That is how we have created or updated our posts state variable. Once the state variable changes, React understands I need to re-render. React will re-render this component. So if I click on add posts, I see the first post. Add post, I see the second post, third post, fourth post, so on and so forth. We have again used the use state hook, but this time the value inside is not a number, is not a boolean, it is an array. The state variable itself is an array which stores the posts on the screen in a raw object format. Raw object. No component is stored in this variable. This gets mapped to this post component. It gets converted to an array of post components, which is what gets rendered over here. That is how you create a website like LinkedIn. Now, of course, on LinkedIn, the state is changed as you scroll down. In our website, the state is changed as you click on this button. To recap, what happens when I click on this button? What does it say? Button on click equal to add post. What is happening inside the add post? I'm calling set posts. I'm calling set posts with the original set of posts, comma, a new post added to the end. That is how the posts array gets updated. Whenever this updates, component re-renders. Post components changes again, and the new post components get rendered over here. That is how you create a LinkedIn-like website where the posts are coming dynamically. If I right click inspect and again open, the React profiler over here, notice when I click on add posts, there is a blue box around the whole thing because the whole component re-rendered. The app component completely re-rendered, which is why, because I updated this. Posts are being used by the app component. तो अगर posts change होंगे, if posts change, app component re-renders. What does re-rendering mean? क्या मतलब इस part में React recalculated कि DOM में क्या आना चाहिए. React recalculated what should come inside the DOM inside this app component. So the re-rendering of an app component means, or re-rendering of any component means कि कुछ तो change हुआ वहाँ. Something changed in the DOM, which is why the whole thing is captured inside a blue box. That is how re-rendering works. That is how state works in case of React. Hopefully that is straightforward-ish. If not, let's see if there is more assignments here that you can solve. Use state, notification count. From scratch, try to build the LinkedIn top bar. Try to randomly update this notification count. Can you try that? Let me post the solution in the slides. So whenever you open the slides, you can always look at the solution that I wrote and try to run it locally. Solution. But hopefully it is clear what a state variable does. Why is it used specifically to create a dynamic website? Whenever you have dynamic parts of the website, they need to be updated via the posts variable, for example, in this case over here. If you want to create the notification component, how can you create it? Okay, Harkirat, what I will do is first let me get rid of everything. Then let me first simply create a div, return a div, which has a bell icon. So let me first get a bell icon image. Copy image address and paste it over here. img src equal to this thing, width equal to, let's say, 20. Let's see what it looks like. Something like this. Then what else do I want? Okay, when I hover over it, the cursor changes to a pointer. So I can write style equal to cursor pointer. That looks decent. Now what do I want? A notification number here. Let's say at the top or the bottom. So let me create a div style equal to background color red and border radius 50, let's say. And here let me put 1 inside initially. Let me convert this into a span. Sort of a notification count I have. Let me so span. Let me do a div followed by the image so that it appears above, and border radius 50, width 20, height 20, 40. Oh, span. Let me move this all above style. That won't work. Background color red, border width, height. Can you not set a width and a height on a span? Or am I missing something obvious here? Let's see. Right click, inspect. Go to the div, go to the span. Make this a little bit bigger. Width and height are not applying to the span because the display inline prevents from width from having any effect. Span is a inline element. So let's just convert this into a div and make the parent have display flex. Again, all of this has nothing to do with React. This is all CSS. And let me add a margin left, or you can do a text align center, either works. Sorry, padding left 1, and then height maybe 40 or 30, and padding top 5, 10, and height would be 20. Make this 5, 25. There we go. Notification bell is a little bit bigger, and a little bit towards the right on its head, not somewhere like this. Very easy to position it if you'd like. You can make a position absolute. The styling doesn't matter. You get the idea. You can style it such that it appears right here. The question is, how can you make sure कि ये notification count goes up by 1, let's say randomly. I want randomly ये notification number keeps going up by 1. Harkirat, this needs to be converted into a state variable. That is correct. So let me convert this into a state variable called count, and here write const count comma set count equal to use state 1, so that initially 1 appears over here. But I want, as time goes by, the value of this count variable goes up. Easy thing to do. Add a button on click equal to increase count. Increase the count. And this function called increase count I will define over here, which does what? It calls set count plus 1. Click on this, notification count goes up. Same thing happens on LinkedIn, but happens a little more silently. Okay, background mein the state variable upgrades. Can you try that next? And this will create very nice foundation for what is coming next, which is use effect. If I ask you, okay, please increase this number by 1 every 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds, this notification count number should go up by 1. How will you do it? You might think, Harkirat, I will first get rid of the button, not needed at all. Then I will call this increase count function every 5 seconds. So I will, create a set interval, something like this. Set interval, increase count ko call kar do every 5 seconds. Good to go, Harkirat. This will work. You might think so, but the first problem here is set increase count is defined inside this function. इसकी scope बाहर नहीं है. You can't access count or set count or increase count outside the app component. So you might say, Harkirat, ठीक है, I will do this. I will put it inside. Set interval, increase count 5000, Harkirat. Every 5 seconds, the number should go up. Do you see it happening? Let's see. Let me decrease this to 1 second actually. Do we see the notification count go up by 1 randomly every 1 second? Yes, Harkirat, seems like it is working. But is it really working? Is there a bug in this specific code? I don't know. Abhi ke liye to it looks fine only. But if you look at it, do you see a very big flash over here? Wait for some time. Do you see a flash? Goes from 0 karke it reaches 23, karke it reaches 24. Something weird is happening over here. It is not a constant clock. बीच में the numbers here go haywire, they go crazy before they reach 36, 37, 38. Can you see? Something random is happening. We have not really, this doesn't seem like it is doing what it was supposed to do. This was supposed to call increase count every 1 second. But what is happening? Website go brrr. That's what we will understand next when we look at use effect. To repeat, what did we do? Initially, we did something like this. We had a button. When you clicked on the button, count went up. This, thankfully, this is the third time we are doing this. So hopefully this is clear. Okay, how in React, if you want to change a certain thing, if some part is dynamic, that dynamic part can only be changed via a state variable, or should only be changed via a state variable. If you want, you can do a bunch of DOM logic over here. लिखने को तो आप यहाँ लिख सकते हो document.getElementById circle .inner HTML equal to something, but we don't want that. What are we saying? We are saying, okay, if you are using React, you use state variables to create the dynamic parts of our website. Just like in the last section, we created the LinkedIn feed via dynamic variables. So here also, we are creating this specific bubble dynamic by using state variables. But the problem is this works perfectly. But when I try to do it silently, when I try to do something like this, here button I am going to get rid of, and I am going to add a interval that calls increase count every 1 second, then it doesn't really work. Something goes wrong, jiski wajah se the whole thing sort of goes crazy eventually. Initially you can't see it, but after some time you see this thing goes crazy. What is that thing? We will understand in the next section. I'm just waiting for it to go crazy so you can see it again. Little bit you probably can already see. You see like a flash before it reaches 25. Wait for like 10 more seconds. Can you see it go crazy? We'll try to understand why it goes crazy and how can we fix it in the next section. All right. In this section, we'll understand the use effect hook. Until now, we understood the use state hook that lets you manage state. Now we want to understand the use effect hook. So can you guess what does it let you manage? It lets you manage something called side effects. Before we understand use effect, let's understand what are side effects. Side effects are operations that interact with the outside world or have effects beyond the component's rendering. This is a mildly complicated statement, but what it means is, here React was supposed to be something like this. There is an app component. You render something inside. Let's say, a div that says hi there. There are no side effects over here. Let me define another component. Let's call it greeting. And here, let's say I return a div that says hi there and props.name, where props is again the props that this greeting component accepts. Let me try to render this greetings component here as well. This is what React is supposed to be. A simple rendering engine where you define a bunch of components. If I look at this finally, oh, see Daisy. It looks something like this. Hi there. This greeting right here, followed by the greeting component which renders hi there, Harkirat. If I add another greeting component, hi there, Raman. This code that you see on screen has no side effects. What are side effects? These aren't the side effects of a medicine that you might have heard of. These side effects are operations that interact with the outside world or have effects beyond the component's rendering. Abhi tak the components that you see on screen only have an effect to render something on the screen. They only do something to render something on the screen. They don't do anything else. But what were we trying to do in the last slide, if you remember? We were trying to start a clock. We were saying I'm going to start a clock that increments a state variable every 1 second, something like this. This is what we were trying in the last section. This is a side effect. It has nothing to do with the components rendering. You are starting a clock independently. That is what is called a side effect. If I remove this line of code, then there are no side effects in the code that you see on screen. I am not starting a clock. I am not fetching data from an API. We will do this at the end of the slide. I am not modifying the DOM manually. If I want, I could have written some code like this, right? Document.getElementById div dot inner HTML equal to something, or let's say counter dot inner HTML equal to some counter plus 1 or some random number over here, and have a div over here which said div id equal to counter. I am not adding this line of code. I am not adding a fetch request over here. I am not adding a set timeout or a set interval over here. And hence I can say this does not have any effects right now. But if I want to introduce any of these, if I want to fetch data from an API, modify the DOM manually, connect to a WebSocket server, or start a clock, these are called effects because they don't just compute the output based on the input. They are not simply computing, this is the input to the greeting component, name equal to Harkirat. So this will be the output from the greeting component, hi there, Harkirat. This is the input to the greeting component, Raman. The output of this greeting component is going to be, hi there, Raman. This is what we do right now. But all of the 4 things that are mentioned here, they have nothing to do with this input-output cycle of a component. They don't touch the input-output cycle. They don't care about rendering. They are side effects, something you want to do on the side while React calculates and renders the rest of your state and components. That is why they are called side effects. They are called side effects because they don't just compute output based on input. This means this specific component has input name, output div which has hi there name. Side effects don't do that. They affect things outside the component itself. They try to fetch data from an external API, api.google.com. Start a new clock that is doing something every 1 second. These are called side effects. What is the problem in running side effects in React components? Why do you need a use effect hook that lets you run these side effects? Why can't you run them directly inside the component is what we will understand in this section. If you try to introduce side effects directly in the rendering logic of a component, if I try to go to my app component and try to add a set interval over here, try to introduce a side effect over here, or try to add a fetch call over here, what problem comes? Why do you need the use effect hook? If you try to introduce side effects directly in your rendering logic, React would run that code every time the component renders. Every time this component renders, this specific function runs. There is a thread executing this line, this line, this line, and then finally this thing gets returned. So every time this component re-renders, this set interval function will run again. This fetch function will run again. If you are introducing side effects directly in the rendering logic, React would run the code every time the component re-renders, and this can lead to unnecessary or duplicated effects like multiple API calls. You might be sending out multiple API calls here because anytime the app component re-renders, this line of code would run. Inconsistent behavior, side effects might happen before the rendering finishes. Before this thing rendered, you started the clock, or some performance issues. Side effects could block the rendering or cause excessive re-rendering. This third thing and this first thing is what was the problem in our original implementation of the counter. The thing that we were doing in the last slide, if you remember the last slide's code, it looked something like this. This is a little complicated, so let me just make it very simple. Something like this. This is what we did in the last section where we were trying to create sort of a counter. 1, 2, 3, 4. How have we created this counter? I have defined a state variable. I have defined a normal function that calls setCount with count plus 1. And then I put the side effect over here. The set interval side effect was put over here. Finally, I returned a div which has count rendered on the screen. Can you see some performance issues? Can you see some inconsistent behavior? Can you notice how this is going very haywire very quickly? Isn't that what was recommended to us over here? Let me put this here. Put this over here. What did it say? Unnecessary or duplicated effects like multiple API calls or multiple clocks that you are starting. Anytime this component renders, set interval, this line of code runs again, which starts a new clock. There are thousands of clocks running, which is why you see, thousands of increase count calls, which is why you see, this very clock go haywire. Inconsistent behavior. This seems like pretty inconsistent behavior. Doesn't look like a clock. Performance issues. There is excessive re-rendering that is happening. If I open the where is it? Wrong browser. Let me open this in Google Chrome. If I open this in Google Chrome and I have this extension running, notice how often does re-rendering happen? How often should it happen? It should happen every 1 second. I though have put a single interval, I think, to start this every 1 second. But notice the baksa doesn't go away. The box doesn't go away because 20 clocks have started, 21 clocks have started. Each one of them is rendering again. So there are too many re-renders that are happening right now, which is causing this clock to also go haywire. Your performance of your application will also be really bad because you have so much rendering that is happening. This is why you need the use effect hook. कि ये जो line of code है ना आपकी, this line of code that is trying to call increase count function every 1 second should not reside over here. This will cause a massive problem. The problem being, the problem being one, 2, and 3. How does use effect manage side effects is what we need to understand next. Before I go into all of this, lot of logic here. This file sort of explains it really well. This is the code on the left where I put the set interval raw in the components rendering logic. Right above the components rendering logic, I put set interval over here. This runs on every render. If the component ever re-renders, सबसे पहले क्या होगा? Clock will start. Clock will call this function after 1 second. That will call set count. That will cause the component to re-render. That will again run this line of code, and then this line of code, which would start another clock. Then both of these clock will start this function, call this function after 1 second. Then set count will get called. Then 2 times re-render will happen. And then 2 more clocks will start. By the end of it, you will have exponential number of clocks running. जबकि you needed just one. आपको तो एक ही clock चाहिए थी. You wanted this side effect to run only once. And to do that, you use the use effect hook. कि यार जो भी ये effect है ना, जो मैं एक बार रन करना चाहता हूँ, whatever this code is that I only want to run once, I'm going to wrap this inside a use effect hook. Just like use state is a hook, use effect is a hook. And if you use the use effect hook, then whatever logic you have written inside runs only on mount. What does mount mean? Mount means जब पहली बार component आया. The first time the component gets put on screen, this code would run. And after that, doesn't matter how many re-renders happen, this line of code will get skipped. This line of code, set interval, will be called only once, which would call increase count every 1 second. ये line एक बार call हुई, this line of code gets called once, which starts a clock that calls increase count every 1 second, which causes your counter to go up. So what does use effect do? The use effect hook lets you perform side effects in functional components in a safe, predictive way. Harkirat, what are functional components? We will come to very soon when we understand functional versus class-based components. But use effect hook lets you perform side effects in functional components, the components that we're writing until now, in a safe and predictable way. If you use the use effect hook, which looks something like this, it looks a little ugly over here. So let me just show it to you here. This was our set interval call. If I say, here I am going to use the use effect hook, where the first argument is a function and the second argument is an array. What is this array? We will be coming to very soon. But this is the inputs to the use effect hook, a function and an array. And whatever code I write inside it, I repeat, whatever code I have written inside it only runs on when the component mounts, only runs when the component renders for the very first time. For now, in main.jsx, make sure you don't have strict mode. We removed this originally. I'm repeating this. Remove strict mode from main.jsx. Go back to app.jsx and try putting a log right above set interval. This will tell you how many times this line of code runs. Let me put this on the left, put this on the right. Localhost : 5173. If I go here and open the console, above set interval gets called once, which means this line also gets called once, which means increase count is now getting called every 1 second. It is still not working. We will get to why it is not working. But we have at least ensured that only once does the clock start. What happens when I comment this line and this line? What happens if I remove the use effect? Then notice the amount of set interval calls. Every time this function gets called, a new clock starts. Notice how many clocks have started now. 250 clocks have started, exponentially growing in number. So that is why if you don't wrap an effect inside a use effect, what would happen is this would run multiple times, more than you would want, and that would cause performance issues in your application. If you want to do anything outside your application's rendering logic, inputs and outputs, इसके बीच में कुछ भी करना है, if you want to run any side effect here, make sure it is wrapped inside a use effect. This use effect will guard these two lines of code, will make sure कि ये दो lines सिर्फ तब run हो, these two lines only run when the component mounts for the first time. तो जैसे component mount हुआ, mount मतलब यहाँ पे पहली बार ही आया. As soon as the component reached here, above set interval was called and only one clock is running. That is calling increase count every 1 second. It is calling increase count every 1 second. Let's put a log here and see. Can you see? Above set interval and then increase count 1, 2, 3, 4. Every 1 second this gets called and this gets called. The problem is this still says 2. It doesn't say 3, 4, 5 like that. Why is that happening? Let's try to log count over here. Let's see, count है क्या? Increase called, count called 1. Even though I'm calling set count, count plus 1, so this should get updated to 2 and it does get updated to 2. Next time increase count is getting called, count is still 1. ये फिर भी 1 है. It again increases it to 1 plus 1. तो कुछ तो bug है अभी. Still a bug is present. We have been able to run a side effect perfectly. This is a side effect that only gets called once. But the problem is when this function gets called, the value of count sort of pins to 1. इसकी value थोड़ी hard code सी हो जाती है to 1. If it was initialized to 1, this value gets hard coded to 1. That is a problem. Question 1 is why does that happen? Question 2 is how do you fix that? To answer question 1, the reason this happens is because of this dependency array. ये जो dependency array है, if you ever want to use a state variable inside a use effect, I repeat, अगर आपको एक state variable को किसी use effect के अंदर use करना है, then you need to put that state variable over here. If you ever want to use, let's say, count, which we are using, can you see count is being used by a function inside this? So if you ever want to use this count variable inside a use effect, it needs to be a dependency over here. We will be coming to dependencies very soon in the next section. But before that, this is why it happens. This is why there is a bug right now. This is why this count doesn't go up by 2. To get rid of it, what you can do is you can use another variant of set count. Set count you can call in 2 ways. Way number 1, give it the final value. यहाँ पे मैंने अगर 1000 डाल दिया, तो whatever value I give inside is the value that gets stored in the count variable. The other thing I can do is this previous value and the new value that I want to set based on the previous value. अभी तक I was doing count plus 1, but that is not working because count is not a dependency over here. So what I can do is I can use the other way to call set count, which is pass in a function. Pass in a function which will get the current value as an input and यहाँ से return कर दूँ the new value, which is going to be current value plus 1. So now if I look at it, 1, 2, 3, clock is working as expected. This and this are almost similar. Set count जिसमें आपने function pass किया, set count in which you passed in a function where you said return current value plus 1, where current value is an input here, is the same as set count, count plus 1. The difference is ये जो count variable है ना हमारा constant count variable, that is pinned to the original value. इसकी value 1 है यहाँ पे because हमने इसको as a dependency नहीं दिया है, because we did not give it as a dependency. It will sort of start to work अगर आप इसको dependency दे दोगे, but then you will have to do something else which we have not yet learned. So that is why we are going to go with this approach of setting the value to x plus 1. And if you look at it, it just works as expected. This count value is still 1. इसकी value अभी भी 1 है, पर इसके अंदर current value will be correct. If I put a log inside here, then you will see the current value that gets logged is correct. पहले it is set to 1, वो 2 बन गई. It is set to 2, वो 3 बन गई. It is set to 3, वो 4 बन गई. So the input that you get here inside this function is the correct value. If you try to do count plus 1, then the count variable that you're using over here is pinned to a constant, which is why it will keep on doing 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1 again and again. So this hopefully is clear, and if not, then we will do this a little bit more. One more thing that you will have to bear with me on is okay, this is one way to write a function and this is a slightly more concise way to write a function. You can also do something like this. This is nothing, this is just an arrow function. Just how I can define a function sum that returns a plus b and takes a and b as an input. I can define a function sum like this. I can also define it like this, a comma b returns a plus b. So this and this are the same thing. If I make it an anonymous function, this and this are the same thing. Similarly, defining an anonymous function that takes current value as an input and returns current value plus 1 is the same as doing this thing right here, current value plus 1. So this is just much more easier to read compared to this syntax, which is why we stick with this. This is how we create a counter which works correctly in a React application. This is sort of a stopwatch application where we have a count state variable, we have a set count updater or dispatch. We start this clock inside a use effect so that this line of code and this line of code only runs once. And here we say increase count. Every time it is getting called, we say set count current value plus 1. ये अभी की वैल्यू है. This is the current value. जो भी current value होगी उसमें 1 add कर दो is the final value that we want set over here. Once we do that, we see everything is fine. Things work as expected. Two more things we have to learn in use effect, which include things like this dependency array and this cleanup logic. Let's understand that in the next section. To recap, this is how you create a stopwatch in React. And the only difference is that I've introduced the use effect hook, जिसके अंदर you should wrap all of your effects. If I don't do that, then as you saw, we have exponential number of clocks that start. And now if you see, this number is going up by a lot, which is the total number of clocks that are running. क्योंकि clocks इतनी ज़्यादा हो गई हैं, they are all calling set count again and again, and this number is increasing exponentially. And if I wrap this inside a use effect and restart, then this line of code runs only once, which is why this goes up only by 1, because there is a single clock that is running. In the next section, let's understand the cleanup logic written over here and the dependency array that is present over here. All right, let's understand the second argument to the use effect hook. The first argument we understand, a function where we write some code that runs when the component mounts. If this is an empty array, I repeat, this effect will run on mount because the array is empty. But what we are learning about in this section is this dependency array. What if I ask you, okay, anytime this count variable changes, we want to do something. We want to push some data to the backend. We want to let our backend know that the count has gone up. Anything. How will you write that logic? You might say, Kirat, I will write it here. Before I call set count or after I call set count, I will let the backend know with a fetch request that something has happened. That is one way to do it. But the problem is, if there is another function called, let's say, decrement count, then here also you will have to repeat that logic. Anytime you call set count, uske baad you will be writing that fetch logic right afterwards. What if you could create another effect? You could create another effect that runs anytime the count changes. That is what this dependency array tracks. It tracks कि anytime this dependency changes, I am going to run this effect. Let's say the effect is simple right now. It's console.log. The count has been updated to count, something like this. So you can have multiple effects inside a component. The first one starts this clock once. The first one runs this effect on mount. The first one is used for our main, clock logic. The second one runs anytime count changes, which is every 1 second. So every 1 second you will see this specific log on the screen. Let's see if that happens or not. Let's go to localhost :5173. Clock is working as expected. Look at the console. This console.log is running every 1 second, which means this side effect runs anytime the count variable changes. If I stop changing the count variable, let's say I comment this line of code. If the count variable doesn't change anymore, then this specific use effect runs only once for, when count is equal to 1. This effect will run the first time also. It will run on mount and it will run every time the count variable changes. This effect will run on mount, but that is it. Since the array is empty, it is not tracking any other dependency. It will only run on mount. This use effect will run on mount as well as whenever count changes. If I uncomment this line again, if I start the clock again, then notice anytime the count variable changes, this use effect will trigger this side effect, which right now is just logging. But you could also add a fetch request over here, whatever api.count.com/update. Okay, the count has been updated to whatever, the specific count. So you can run this side effect by listening to the count variable. Anytime the count variable changes, you run that fetch request or you run this log over here. That is what use effect really lets you do. Even though most of the times you will be using use effect like this. You will be using use effect with the second element being an empty array, but there will be cases where you will have to decide on the dependencies, what dependencies to pass in and what dependencies to listen to and run a side effect. I could add another variable here called count2, let's say. And I could add another, count2 over here that is rendered. And I can be like, yeah, use effect, increase the first count every 1 second and also start another clock that decreases the second count every 1 second. So function decrease count, set count to current value -1. That way I have two counts, one going up from 1, other going down from 1. These are the two counts that I have. One is updating this value, other is updating this value. But the use effect right now only runs whenever the count variable changes. It does not run when the count2 variable changes. If I want it to run when count changes and count2 changes, then I can put something like this. Then you will see this effect runs when either count changes or the count2 variable changes. Now they're changing sort of together, which is why you see this. But let me change the clock times. Let me change the first one to be 5 seconds, second one to be 10 seconds. After 5 seconds, count would change. It became 2 and notice the log came. After 5 more seconds, oh, that won't work. Let's make this 5 and let's make this 8. Yeah. So now after 5 seconds, notice the first log will come. This one right here. And after 3 more seconds, count2 updated. So this effect ran again. So it's an array. You can put multiple dependencies over here, but again, rarely will you put multiple dependencies. You will either be doing this, or in some cases, you will be doing this right here. You will be having a single dependency in your use effect. Let's look at an example. LinkedIn is actually a perfect example of this. LinkedIn has various tabs on the top. So this home tab, when you go here, it sends the request to the backend, gets all of your posts. Jobs tag, you click here, it sends a request to the backend, shows you all the posts. Notifications tab, as soon as I click on it, it needs to run an effect to send a request to the backend and get back a response. So whenever the tab is changing, whenever a tab state variable is changing, I want to run an effect. So LinkedIn is a perfect example where you would have a use effect with a single attribute here. The current tab, is the current tab this? Whenever the current tab changes, you send a backend request, you send a side effect. Let's try to code it. Let me completely get rid of all the code here. And let me try to make something like LinkedIn. I will first create a bunch of tabs on the top. So first button called your feed, second button you called your notifications, third button called your whatever messages, fourth called jobs, let's say. So I have 4 tabs over here, similar to the 5 tabs over here. And I'm going to create a variable const current tab, comma, set current tab. I will say, your color is going to be, if the current tab is feed, then your color will be red, else your color will be black. That way I know कौन सा select किया हुआ है मैंने. For the second button, I will say very similarly कि your color will be, if current tab is notifications, then it will be red, else it will be black. Similarly, on the third button, I will say the same thing. Fourth button also, I will say the same thing. Of course, the current tab here will be messages. The current tab here would be jobs. This is what my 4 buttons look like right now. Here, your color will be red. What does this line of code do? It is a ternary operator again. Okay, color will be, if current tab is feed, then red, else it will be black. If current tab is notifications, then it will be red, else it will be black. If current tab is messages, then it will be red, else it will be black. If current tab is jobs, then the fourth one will have red as the color, else black. That is what my code looks like. What else do I need to do? Can you guess? I need to add on click handlers. Okay, when I click on this, now I can define a function outside, or I can define a function directly over here. Okay, whenever this specific button is clicked, then set current tab to be feed. Do not do this. One common mistake everyone does is this. Okay, हाँ ठीक है हरकीरत. Button on click equal to set current tab feed. This is wrong. This expects a function signature. Set current tab returns nothing. If you write this, it is the same as writing this. On click equal to undefined, because set current tab feed is a function. You have called that function right here. This function returns nothing. So it is the same as writing this. So do not write this directly. Give it a function. Inside the function, write this. If you want to get fancy, then you can also do something like this. This is the fancy version of it, the arrow function. This is the plain version of it, which is something like this. I've done the first one. I'm going to do the second one similarly. Here I'll set it to notifications. Here I will set it to messages. Here I will set it to jobs. Let's see. Notice no use effects here. It was simple use state logic. Hai. This so we learned a few slides back, right? What is use state? This is just me implementing functionality that looks like this. If I click on jobs, this becomes red. If I click on messages, this becomes red. If I click on notifications, this becomes red. How am I doing it? I have a current tab variable. Which I initialize to feed. I write current tab is initially going to be feed. And then as you click on the first button, I will set current tab to feed. If you click on the second button, I will set this variable to be notifications, messages, jobs. Harkirat, why have you not done this? Current value and then this. You can also do that, but I don't want to use the current value, which is why, I can simply pass in the final value here as well. And what else have I done? Kya style is going to be this. The color is going to be red if current tab is feed, black otherwise. That way, 3 of them are going to remain black. The currently selected one is going to remain red. The question is, where does use effect come into the picture, Harkirat? Well, what do you think happens here? When I click on this guy, a backend request goes out, gets me some response, and that response gets rendered on the screen. If I click on home, a backend request goes out. I need to run a side effect whenever the current tab variable changes, which is why here there will be a use effect where the first argument will send a backend request to get data for this tab. And what is the dependency array going to be? The current tab, this thing right here. So now if you look at it, console.log send request to backend to get data for tab. If you look at it, if I refresh, it gives an error because, no idea. I will have to debug as well. Right click console. And the error is tab is not defined. I need to put current tab over here. Refresh. What do the logs say? The logs say, let me open the console. Send backend request for the first tab, which is feed. Now if I click on notifications, send request to backend for getting data for notifications. If I click on messages, send request to backend to get data for messages. Jobs. As I click on a tab, I can run a side effect. I can run an effect that will eventually hit the backend. For now, we are just logging. If you want, you can also use this website called JSON placeholder, which will give you free fake APIs. So if there you go, /notifications, this API, this backend is for a to-dos application. It is the backend of a to-dos application. So if we want to use this backend, if we don't want to code our backend today, what we can do is we can change the application a bit. Rather than feed notifications, messages, and jobs, let's have the 4 tabs be to do 1, to do 2, to do 3, to do 4. I have 4 tabs over here: to do 1, to do 2, to do 3, to do 4. And probably need something better. Let it be this. Initial state is 1. Set current tab to be 1. If it is 1, then you render this, and here I will render to do number 1. Here I will say if the tab is 2, set it to 2, to do number 2. Here I will say button on click, set it to 3. If current tab is 3, then red else black. Here I will say set the current tab to be 4. And if it is 4, then red else black. To do number 4. Alrighty. To do 1, to do 3, to do 3, to do 4. If I click on them, I reach the right ones. Now I want to lazily load the data from the backend. What does lazily load mean? When the user clicks on it, iske baad I will send a backend request to get the data. So what can I do? I already have this log running. Whenever the current tab changes, we wanted to send a backend request, and now we can send a fetch request where to JSON placeholder.typecode.com/todos/ the number of the to do. So something like this current tab. I send a fetch request. It returns a promise res. Then I do const JSON equal to await res.json. This needs to be an async function. Make this full screen. And then I simply, let's say, set tab data to be JSON. And I introduce another state variable called tab data, set tab data to be, let's say, an empty object initially. And I render this tab data dot whatever, let's say title over here, so that specific to do ka title gets rendered on the screen. I wrote a lot of code. Let me take you it from the top. Current tab state variable initialized to 1. Tab data or to do data basically initialized to an empty array initially. A use effect which runs whenever the current tab variable changes. जब भी ये change होगा, I first log this on the screen. I don't even need the log anymore. Let me remove that. I send a backend request. Hopefully we understand the fetch API by now. This is how you send a backend request to a server. I get back the response. I convert the response into JSON. I set that response in this tab data state variable. Harkirat, why have you not done this pre-value? Because I don't want to use the previous value. Whatever the backend returned me, in this case, the backend will return me an object like this. That object as such, I put in the tab data state variable. It triggers a re-render, and that re-render ke end mein, I log tab data dot title. The title I log on the screen. So if I refresh, I get to do number 1 ka content here. Let me actually put a BR tag. So it comes on the next line. If I click on to do 2, it gives me the data of to do 2. Click on to do 3, it gives me the data of to do 3. To do 4, it gives me the data of to do 4. to do 1, again back to do 1. If I open the network tab, and now click on to do 3, notice a request goes out to JSON placeholder /typecode.typecode.com /todo/3. If I click on to do 4, a backend request goes out that returns me this data that I render on the screen. So do we understand why side effects are useful? First use case was clocks, a faddy use case you might not use much. But this use case, though, you will use a lot. Bhai. Shifting from one tab to another is a very important use case that you will see on most single page applications. And this is how you implement that use case here. Now, some things I have missed. There is no loader over here. If I click on this changes first, and after a second, this changes. So I should add some loading logic over here. Can you think of how to add that? How can I put a loader over here so that when the data is coming from the backend, the loader appears over here, and as the data comes from the backend, the final text comes. मैं यहाँ click कर रहा हूँ. Notice this becomes red immediately. The contents here change after 0.5 seconds or so, because the backend request is going out. It is fetching the data from the backend. So if I click over here, this backend request takes some time. It is going to some server in the US. For that time, I still see the old to do over here. How can I add loading as a text over here? That's what happens on LinkedIn, right? If I refresh and click on notifications, first there's a loader and then this comes. How can you add that loader? That is the assignment for you. Very simple to add. You just need to introduce one more state variable here called loading. Add another state variable here called loading, comma, set loading, which will be true initially. Whenever this data is being fetched, before it is being fetched, set loading to be true. After the data is fetched, set loading to be false. And in your final render, do a conditional render here. Excuse me. Do a conditional render here. Okay, if it is loading, then print loading ... on the screen. If it is not loading, then print tab data.title. What did I do? I introduced a state variable here. I said here, जब भी बंदा tab बदलेगा, whenever they change tab, control will reach here, set this variable to be true. कि भाई अब तो loading start हो गई. Then send the backend request. Whenever this succeeds after 1 second, 0.5 seconds, then set it to false. तो ये state variable जो है will keep on going to true from time to time. And whenever it becomes true, I render loading on the screen. Let's see if that happens. Loading and then the final thing. Loading and then the final thing. Loading and then the final thing. Of course, you can make it prettier. You can add skeletons similar to LinkedIn. But this is also, hopefully gives you an idea of effects and state. 3 state variables I have now. Loading, tab data, current tab. Hopefully that is clear. This covers the dependency array. Okay. This effect runs whenever this dependency changes. If you don't give a dependency, this effect will run only on mount, which means when the first time when the component mounts. If you give it a dependency, then this will run, anytime this dependency changes, which is, this, it'll run like that. Cool. That is the second part of use effect, the dependency array. The third thing in use effect that we need to understand is, wait for it, this cleanup code, unsubscribing from an event or clearing the timers. Let's understand this next. All right, let's understand the cleanup function inside a use effect through examples. Hopefully you understand the code that I've written on the left by now. I'm rendering a timer component inside which I have a seconds state variable. I render the seconds over here as these many seconds have elapsed, and inside the use effect, I start a clock which sets the seconds to be previous state plus 1. Hopefully this code we understand by now. This is an arrow function. You can always replace this with, a normal function if you'd like, if this feels a little complicated, all 3 of these. But hopefully this code we understand. But there is a subtle problem in this code. The problem is, if I ever unmount the timer component, if this ever goes away from here, the clock still remains active. This is a side effect. This has nothing to do with the rendering or the unrendering, mounting or the unmounting of the timer component. This component, this component wouldn't stop this clock automatically if it gets unmounted. Did you see the clock go up very fast? Can you guess why that happened? Hot module replacement. We'll get to what that is eventually. The timer component is rendered over here. But let's say I change this logic a bit. I say const show timer comma set show timer equal to use state true, let's say. And I conditionally render the timer component. Okay, if show timer is true, only then render the timer component. And in this component, I add another effect where I say, okay, hey, I want to every 1 second, I want to start another clock that every 1 second will set show timer to be the opposite of the current value. If this is the current value, then I'm setting it to not current value. Set show timer, current value, not current value. Basically, flip its value. Until now, what were we doing? We were doing current value and then current value plus 1. What am I doing right now? Current value, not current value. If it is true, make it false. If it is false, make it true. Let's increase this to 5 seconds. For 5 seconds, you see the clock. After 5 seconds, it vanishes because show timer becomes false. After 5 seconds, it becomes true again, you see it again. So we are conditionally rendering the timer component over here. But the problem is these clocks that you are starting from inside clock, these intervals that you have started never stop. Even when the timer component unrenders, even when the timer component unmounts, notice this log will keep on going. 6, 7. This log is still logging, which means this set seconds is also still getting called. Of course, it is not doing anything. The state variable vanished, but this log keeps on appearing, which tells you that even when the component is not mounted, chala gaya hai wo DOM se, still the clock is running. This is where a cleanup function comes into the picture. What is a cleanup function? Let's go to the slides. Where are the slides? There we go. This is the effect. These are the dependencies. And this is the cleanup function. Inside the use effect, the function that you have can itself return a function where you write the cleanup code. And what does it say? Cleanup code example, unsubscribing from an event or clearing the timers. What we want is this second thing. We want to do some cleanup whenever this component unmounts. Whenever this component mounts, we want this logic to run. Whenever this component unmounts, goes away from the DOM, we want to clear an interval. Clear interval is a function that JavaScript provides you, nothing related to React. Just how set interval is a function that JavaScript provides you that starts a clock. And if I write, let clock equal to this thing. If I call clear interval with this clock variable, it will stop that clock. So set interval returns you a variable. This is a timer or a number. This number, when you pass to the clear interval function, which is another global function similar to set interval, it will stop that specific clock. So that is what clear interval does. If I save this and now check my code out and refresh, what do you see? Pehle to from inside the clock is getting logged 5 times. Then it is not getting logged anymore. Why? Because this cleanup function ran when the component unmounted. The first time this component mounts, this code runs. The first time this component unmounts, this specific function runs. Again, if this component mounts, again all of this code will run. Again, if this component unmounts, again this specific function will run. So use effect may the first argument that you give. Until now, we had just used this part. We had not used its return value. You can use its return value like this. It returns a function. Whatever logic you write inside here is the logic that will run when this component unmounts, when it gets removed from the screen. So when it gets added to the screen, ye lines run hongi. When it gets removed from the screen, this line runs, which stops the clock, which is why you don't see any logs over here. Do we understand the cleanup function? Where would it be needed? One important use case where it would be needed is this. If I go to LinkedIn, on this page, I'm sending a request to the backend. But what if I was, let's say, subscribing to the backend on a WebSocket server? If you don't know WebSocket servers, it's fine, ignore. Then when I change this tab, I need to unsubscribe from that WebSocket server. When I go here, I need to subscribe to all the notifications coming over here. Even if no new notifications are coming, I want them to come here on the screen. But when I move off of this tab, I want the cleanup function to run and stop this subscription. When I go to this notifications tab, I'm subscribing to some backend receiving updates from it. Whenever I change this tab, I want to unsubscribe from that backend. I don't want to receive changes anymore. I'm on a different page now. So that logic would run inside this effect. Another good example I can show you is a website like Zoom or gather.town, where if I am on, let me show you what gather.town is. It is a website where there are virtual spaces. For example, I'm on this virtual space right here. Let's wait for it. I'm on this virtual space right here. Now, when I'm inside any of these rooms, for example, I want to subscribe to a backend. Or let's say even better, let's say this component is rendered right now, this Office 1 component. But so I'm subscribed to anyone else that's over here. If you come into this room, then I will see you over here. I will be subscribed to any movement that you are making. But if I move off of this component into a separate component, room 2 component, then I want to unsubscribe from that room, resubscribe to this room. So basically what is happening? Pehle I was in room 1 and now I am in room 2. Under certain conditions, room 1 is rendered. Under certain conditions, room 2 is rendered. When room 1 is rendered, here the logic is written to connect, to let the server know that I am in room 1, send me all the user details from room 1. But when this unmounts, when I moved from room 1 to room 2, then I need to unsubscribe from that room. I don't need to know who is in that room anymore. I need to resubscribe to room 2. कि हाँ इस room में कौन है बताओ. I will start to subscribe to updates from this room 2. And of course, when I move away from room 2 back to room 1, then this subscription will close. Another subscription will start. So that is where you need the unsubscribe functionality. That was mentioned here as well. Unsubscribing from an event or clearing the timers. Clearing the timers we just saw. And unsubscribing from an event means unsubscribing from इस room की मुझे नहीं फर्क पड़ता. Whoever is moving here, let them move. I don't need any information from them. I'm in this room. Whoever is here, I want to subscribe to them. If someone is here, send me their updates. I want to see their avatar here. But if I move from here to here, then unsubscribe me from that room, resubscribe me to this room. When we reach WebSockets, we will understand all of this logic as well. All right. Cool, folks. That's all I had for use effect. Let me go back to the slides and show you. Until now, we have gone through starting a React project, components, use state, tracking re-renders, use effect, props, and conditional rendering. What is left is thankfully some small things, which again, I think either offline video or live, hopefully offline video only, before we reach single page applications and routing and start to build the application. So this is probably what we will cover in a live video. And I will try to cover everything that you see over here from children up to fragments in another offline video. In this offline video, the difficult things we have learned are use state and use effect and some small things and hacks here and there. All right. I will see you in the next one where we talk about children, lists and keys, inline styling. We have sort of already covered this. Class-based components versus functional components, just an interview question. You don't really need to know about it. Lifecycle events, error boundary and fragments. All of this in an offline video. This probably live this week.